They said nothing ever crawls into Camp Pendleton at 3:47 a.m. without carrying a story it can no longer bury. The security lights along the perimeter fence of the Marine base cut through the coastal fog in slow, sweeping arcs, turning the mist into pale moving walls as if the night itself was breathing. Sergeant Daniel Carter had seen hundreds of quiet nights like this one, nights where nothing changed and everything felt frozen in discipline and routine. But something about the air at the North Gate felt different, heavier, like the silence was waiting to be interrupted. That was when he saw it. A shape low to the ground, moving wrong against the symmetry of the asphalt, dragging itself forward with a kind of exhausted determination that did not belong to anything that had given up on life. At first he thought it was debris pushed by wind, maybe a torn tarp or a discarded training cover. But then the shape lifted its head just enough for the light to catch the pale reflection of its coat, and Carter froze without even realizing it. A German shepherd, its fur unusually white with faint gray tones like ash washed in rain, was crawling toward the open gate of the base. Its movements were slow, deliberate, not from fear but from depletion, as if every inch forward had to be negotiated with pain and purpose. There was no collar visible at first glance. No identification tags, only a faint dark stain beneath its neck where something had once been removed or burned away. Carter stepped off the patrol path instinctively, boots pressing into damp gravel, the sound muted by the fog that clung to everything like memory. The dog did not run away. It did not bark. It simply stopped, raised its head, and looked directly at him as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. In that gaze there was no panic, only recognition, like it had seen something in him that mattered more than protocol or procedure. Carter lowered his flashlight slightly, careful not to blind it, and spoke in a voice that was softer than he expected. "Easy now. You're on restricted ground." But the dog did not respond to the words. Instead, it took another step forward, then another, dragging its front paw slightly, as if guiding itself by instinct rather than strength. Behind Carter, the base gates remained half open, the red indicator lights blinking in steady rhythm, and beyond them the hum of distant generators filled the night like a low heartbeat. The dog reached the edge of the light and stopped again, its chest rising and falling unevenly, each breath visible in the cold air. Carter noticed something then that made his focus sharpen in a way training always demanded but never explained. The dog's eyes were not scanning for escape or threat. They were locked on him, steady, unwavering, as if it was measuring whether he was the right person to trust with something it could no longer carry alone. A second Marine patrol vehicle passed in the distance, headlights briefly cutting across the scene, but the dog did not react. It only shifted its weight slightly and lowered its head, as if conserving what little energy remained. Carter crouched slowly, keeping his hands visible, the way he had been trained for unpredictable encounters in the field. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of salt from the nearby coast, mixed with rain and something else he could not immediately place, something metallic and old, like time itself had left a trace on the animal. For a moment, neither man nor dog moved. The entire base seemed to exist in suspension, the world reduced to a narrow corridor of light and fog where something unspoken was about to be decided. Then the dog took one final step forward and stopped directly in front of him, so close that Carter could see the uneven texture of its fur, the way it had been worn down by distance and hardship rather than neglect. And in that silence, before anything else could happen, Carter realized this was not an animal that had wandered here by accident. It had come here on purpose, carrying something it refused to leave outside the gate. The moment Sergeant Daniel Carter lowered himself closer, the white German shepherd did not retreat, did not flinch, only remained still as if it had already accepted every possible outcome of this encounter and still chose to stay. The fog around Camp Pendleton thickened slightly. As the coastal wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of moving vehicles along the perimeter road, but everything near the gate felt unnaturally quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Carter slowly extended one hand, palm open, letting the dog decide the distance between them, and for a brief instant the animal hesitated, its ears twitching as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, with a slow and careful motion, it leaned forward and touched his glove with its nose, a contact so light it almost felt like a question rather than a gesture. Carter exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath and glanced toward the security station where faint light flickered through the glass. But no one else had yet noticed what had arrived at their gate. The dog shifted again, this time attempting to rise fully on its legs, but the effort caused its body to tremble, forcing it to settle back down onto the cold pavement. Carter made a decision without speaking it aloud. He reached for his radio and called in a soft, controlled voice requesting immediate veterinary support at the north gate, then carefully removed his field jacket and placed it on the ground beside the animal. The German Shepherd did not move away from it. Instead, it lowered its head onto the fabric as if it recognized comfort in the simplest form of warmth. Within minutes, Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves arrived from the security post, his posture sharp and alert, eyes narrowing as he assessed the scene without emotion at first, then slowly shifting to something closer to concern as he recognized Carter's stance. "Where did it come from?" Reeves asked, scanning the perimeter fence. Carter shook his head slightly. "It came here on its own," he replied, voice steady but low, as if saying it too loudly might break something fragile. The dog remained still, only its breathing marking the passage of time, each inhale uneven but persistent. Dr. Emily Watson arrived shortly after in a utility vehicle marked for base veterinary response, stepping out with a compact medical kit and the calm precision of someone who had learned to read distress without needing words. She crouched near the animal, her eyes scanning carefully across its coat, pausing when she noticed the unusual pale coloration and the faint burn-like marking beneath the neck where identification would normally be placed. "This is not natural," she said softly, not as a conclusion, but as an observation forming in real time. Carter looked closer for the first time with clinical attention and saw it too, a damaged area where something had once been attached, removed, or deliberately erased. The dog shifted slightly at her touch, but did not resist, only letting out a low breath as if acknowledging the examination without fear. As Emily checked for stability, she frowned at something else, a faint metallic residue caught in the fur along the shoulder line, subtle enough to be missed unless one was looking for it. Reeves stepped back, arms crossed, watching in silence, his instincts trained to detect patterns even when none were yet visible. The dog suddenly lifted its head again, this time turning it toward the inner base, toward a direction deeper inside Camp Pendleton, where restricted facilities and storage units stretched beyond the visible barracks. It made a small movement forward, weak but deliberate, as if trying to stand again despite exhaustion. Carter noticed it immediately. "It is trying to go somewhere," he said quietly. Emily followed the direction of its gaze, and then back to Carter. "Or it is trying to show us something," she replied. A passing patrol slowed briefly, observing the unusual gathering at the gate, but no one intervened. The dog attempted one more step, dragging itself forward just enough to leave a faint mark on the wet pavement, then stopped again, breathing harder now, its body lowering as energy faded. Carter knelt beside it again, this time closer, and something in the animal's expression changed, not desperation, but insistence, as if it understood that time was limited and communication had to happen now or not at all. Reeves finally spoke again, more quietly this time. "If it came through the outer perimeter like that, it bypassed 2 motion sensors." That statement hung in the air longer than intended. Emily did not respond immediately, instead, focusing on stabilizing the dog, gently wrapping a thermal blanket around its shoulders. Carter looked down at the animal, and for a moment felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest, not of duty, but of recognition that whatever stood in front of him had not simply wandered in from the outside world. It had crossed through something unseen, carrying a purpose it had not yet revealed. And as the morning light began to shift slightly behind the fog, the German Shepherd lifted its head one final time and locked eyes with Carter again, as if silently confirming that it had finally reached the right place, but the reason why was still waiting somewhere deeper inside the base. The first light of dawn had not yet fully broken through the coastal fog over Camp Pendleton, but the base was already awake with its usual rhythm of disciplined movement, distant engines, and the quiet urgency of early duty calls. At the north gate, Sergeant Daniel Carter remained kneeling beside the white German Shepherd, his gloved hand resting close but not touching, as if even pressure from the world itself might cause the animal to disappear before it finished whatever it had come here to do. The thermal blanket Dr. Emily Watson had placed over it rose and fell in uneven cycles, each breath slower than the last, but still present, still refusing to fade. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves stood a few feet back, arms folded, eyes narrowed not out of suspicion alone but calculation, the kind trained soldiers develop when something does not align with expectation. The dog's gaze, however, remained unchanged. It was fixed not on the men around it, not on the gate it had crossed, but inward toward the base itself, deeper, as if it could see beyond buildings, fences, and protocol. Emily adjusted her medical scanner and frowned slightly as it registered irregular fatigue markers, not critical injury alone, but signs of prolonged exposure to harsh conditions, distance, and stress far beyond what would be expected from a stray animal. "It is not just exhausted," she said quietly. "It is driven by something." Carter followed the direction of the dog's gaze again, this time more carefully, and noticed the subtle tension in its front legs each time it attempted to rise, as though every instinct was pulling it toward a destination it refused to abandon. Reeves stepped closer now, lowering his voice. "If it crossed perimeter detection without triggering full response protocols, that means it either learned a blind spot or was guided through one." Carter looked at him. Guided by what? Reeves did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the fog-covered expanse of the base where storage units and restricted facilities lay hidden behind rows of barracks and service roads. The dog shifted suddenly, attempting once more to stand, and this time succeeded for only a few seconds before its legs trembled and forced it back down. Yet even in collapse, its head remained lifted, its focus unbroken. Emily placed a small hydration container near its muzzle, and after a brief hesitation, it drank slowly, carefully, as though conserving every movement mattered. Carter noticed something new now, a faint reaction whenever distant base activity echoed through the fog, particularly near the inner storage sector where maintenance crews were beginning their morning routines. The dog's ears would twitch, its body tightening slightly each time, responding not to sound alone but pattern, as if recognizing something embedded within the rhythm of the base itself. "It is reacting to something specific," Carter said. Emily nodded. "Or someone." That statement lingered in the air, heavy but unconfirmed. Reeves finally unfolded his arms. "We need to report this beyond Gate Command," he said, but Carter did not move. His attention remained locked on the animal, which had now lowered its head briefly before lifting it again toward the same direction as before, unwavering in intent. Carter slowly removed his glove, ignoring Emily's cautious glance, and placed his bare hand near the dog's front paw. The animal did not retreat. Instead, it shifted slightly closer, just enough for contact, and rested its weight against him for a moment, a gesture so small it carried more meaning than any command or signal. In that instant, Carter felt something shift in his understanding, not explanation, but recognition that this was not random arrival. This was continuation. Emily stood up slowly, scanning the horizon where the fog was beginning to thin just enough for the outlines of base structures to emerge like shadows returning to form. "Whatever it is carrying," she said, "it is not finished." The dog suddenly lifted its head higher than before, focusing intensely toward the inner access road, where supply vehicles were beginning to move in synchronized formation. Its breathing changed, sharper now, not panicked but alert, and for the first time since its arrival, it tried to stand with determination rather than exhaustion. Carter reacted immediately, supporting its weight as it rose unsteadily onto its legs. Reeves watched closely, his expression tightening slightly as he followed the same line of sight. "It is choosing a direction," he said quietly. Carter looked at the animal, then toward the base beyond the gate, where the morning routine continued as if nothing unusual had entered. But something had. And as the German Shepherd took one slow step forward, then another, refusing to collapse despite its condition, it became clear that whatever had brought it here was not behind it anymore. It was ahead, waiting somewhere inside the structure of the base itself, and it had not yet revealed whether it was meant to be found or feared. The white German Shepherd had managed only a few slow steps before its strength seemed to settle into a fragile rhythm, each movement measured, as if the body itself understood it was operating on borrowed time. Sergeant Daniel Carter kept one steady hand near its shoulder without pressing down, matching its pace as they moved away from the north gate and toward the inner access road of Camp Pendleton. The morning fog had begun to lift in thin layers, revealing sections of the base one at a time, like a slow unveiling of something long hidden beneath silence. Dr. Emily Watson walked slightly ahead now, communicating quietly into her handheld radio, requesting clearance to move a found animal under controlled escort, while Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves followed at a measured distance, eyes constantly scanning both the dog and the surroundings as if expecting the environment itself to react. The German Shepherd did not hesitate. Its direction was precise, almost deliberate, turning slightly whenever Carter attempted to adjust its path, as though it recognized routes that even he did not. There was a subtle urgency in its pace, not frantic but deeply intentional, like a memory pulling it forward through exhaustion. As they passed the first row of maintenance buildings, the base began to fully awaken around them, with personnel moving between vehicles and supply stations, but no one stopped to question the unusual procession yet. Carter noticed the dog's attention sharpen each time they neared a junction leading deeper into restricted storage sectors. It would pause briefly, lift its head, and then continue as if confirming each step against an internal map only it could read. Emily slowed her pace and turned slightly. "It is navigating," she said. "Not wandering." Reeves responded without looking away from the animal. "Navigating what?" No one answered immediately. The question lingered as they crossed into a quieter section of the base where large supply containers sat aligned in long, structured rows, their metal surfaces reflecting faint morning light. The German Shepherd suddenly stopped at the edge of one of these rows. It stood still, breathing heavier now, its body trembling slightly, but its focus intensifying. Carter knelt beside it again, noticing how the animal's eyes were locked on a specific container further down the line, one marked with faded identification numbers and maintenance tags that had been partially replaced. Emily stepped closer and scanned the container with a small portable reader, frowning as it returned incomplete archival data. "This unit has been reclassified multiple times," she said. "It should not even be active in current inventory." Reeves stepped forward, his tone tightening. "That sector was cleared last year." The dog let out a low, controlled sound, not a bark, but something restrained, as if acknowledging proximity to what it had been searching for. It took a few steps forward, then stopped again directly in front of the container, placing one paw against the metal surface. Carter felt an immediate shift in the atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable, as if the animal's presence had disrupted something carefully sealed. Emily examined the ground around the container and noticed faint, irregular markings in the dust, almost like repeated movements had occurred here recently, though there was no official record of activity in this section for weeks. Reeves activated his radio again, requesting confirmation of all personnel assigned to Storage Sector 7, but the response came back negative, no active assignment scheduled. The German Shepherd suddenly pressed its head against the container, holding still for several seconds, its breathing slowing, as if listening. Carter stepped closer and placed a hand lightly on its back, feeling the tension in its frame, not fear, but recognition. "It knows this place," Carter said quietly. Emily looked at him. "Or it remembers it." That statement changed the tone of everything around them. The fog had now lifted almost completely, revealing the full structure of the container rows stretching further than initially visible, each one identical, yet somehow different in the way they were positioned, suggesting recent adjustment rather than static storage. The dog shifted again, moving along the side of the container until it reached a corner seam, where it stopped and stared downward at a small access panel near the base. Carter followed its gaze and noticed something subtle, a panel that appeared slightly newer than the surrounding metal, as if replaced or repaired more recently than the rest of the unit. Reeves stepped in closer, lowering his voice. "That should not be accessible without clearance from Logistics Command." Emily ran another scan and paused, her expression tightening slightly. "There is auxiliary power running through this unit," she said. Carter looked at her. "That means it is active." She nodded once, slowly. The German Shepherd suddenly became still, its body no longer trembling but fully focused, as if it had reached the exact point it had been guiding them toward since its arrival. It lifted its head one final time, looking directly at Carter, and in that moment there was no uncertainty in its expression, only confirmation that the path had ended here, and whatever truth it carried had finally reached its destination. The moment the German Shepherd came to a complete stop beside the auxiliary access panel, the entire atmosphere around Storage Sector 7 seemed to tighten, as if the base itself had shifted from routine operations into something more focused and alert. Sergeant Daniel Carter stood just behind the animal now, his hand hovering a few inches above its shoulder, feeling the subtle tension in its body increase rather than fade, as though the dog was no longer searching but confirming. Dr. Emily Watson stepped closer to the container wall, running her scanner along the seams of the metal structure, her eyes narrowing as the readings fluctuated in a pattern that did not match standard storage configuration. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves arrived at Carter's side, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the exact point where the dog's nose now rested against the lower edge of the panel. "This section should be dormant," Reeves said quietly, more to himself than to the others. "There should be no active systems running here." Emily checked her device again. "There is low-level power distribution," she confirmed. "Not enough for full operations, but enough to maintain internal systems." Carter looked down at the German Shepherd, noticing how it remained perfectly still, as if listening through the metal itself. The fog had fully lifted now, revealing the structured rows of containers stretching outward under the pale morning light, each one identical, yet somehow contributing to the feeling that this specific unit did not belong in the same category as the others. Carter crouched slightly and examined the panel more closely. It was newer than the surrounding surface, with faint signs of recent maintenance that did not match the official logs. Emily traced the edges with her scanner and frowned. "This panel was replaced within the last few weeks," she said. Reeves immediately responded, "That is not in any authorized maintenance record." The German Shepherd shifted its weight and pressed its paw lightly against the panel again, not aggressively, but with a steady persistence that suggested familiarity rather than discovery. Carter felt a strange connection forming in that moment, not between man and animal alone, but between intention and place, as if the dog was not reacting to the container, but recognizing it. He placed one hand gently against the metal surface and felt a faint vibration beneath it, subtle but present, like a system running quietly behind a sealed wall. Emily stepped back slightly, adjusting her radio frequency. "I am going to request clearance for a full inspection," she said. Reeves nodded once, but did not take his eyes off the container. "Do it quietly," he replied. The German Shepherd suddenly lifted its head and turned toward Carter again, holding his gaze for several seconds, its amber eyes steady and focused with an intensity that carried no confusion, only confirmation. Carter slowly exhaled, realizing that the animal had not been wandering, nor searching randomly across the base. It had followed something precise, something internal and remembered. The surrounding activity of the base seemed to fade into the background as if distance itself had increased around them, isolating this moment at the container into its own quiet space. A faint mechanical hum became noticeable now, barely audible unless one stood directly beside the unit. Emily noticed it too and lowered her scanner. "There is something behind this panel," she said softly. Carter nodded without speaking. Reeves tightened his jaw slightly. "If there is unauthorized activity inside a restricted storage unit, this becomes command level immediately." The German Shepherd took one slow step back, then another, as if making room for what came next, but its eyes never left the panel. Carter understood then that whatever lay behind the sealed surface was not unknown to the animal. It was expected, and as the morning light fully broke through the remaining haze above Camp Pendleton, casting long shadows across the storage rows, the realization settled in quietly that this was no longer about a stray animal finding shelter, but about a path that had been deliberately followed to a place no one else had been meant to notice. The silence around Storage Sector 7 felt different now, no longer like an absence of sound, but like a pressure building beneath it, as if the entire section of Camp Pendleton had narrowed its attention to the sealed container and the small group standing before it. Sergeant Daniel Carter remained close to the German Shepherd, his posture steady but alert, watching the way the animal's focus never wavered from the auxiliary panel even as additional personnel began to arrive in the distance. Dr. Emily Watson had already escalated her request, and now faint radio confirmations crackled intermittently from her handheld device, acknowledging that command oversight would be arriving shortly. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves stood slightly forward, his stance firm, eyes fixed on the container with the kind of controlled intensity that suggested he was measuring risk in silence rather than words. The German Shepherd suddenly shifted again, stepping closer to the panel, then stopping, its head tilted slightly, as if waiting for something within the structure to respond. Carter noticed it immediately. The behavior was not random. It was timing itself to something unseen. Emily moved closer to the panel and traced a thin seam running along its edge that had been recently reinforced. "This is not standard issue sealing," she said quietly. "It has been modified after installation." Reeves leaned in, examining the bolts and noticing subtle inconsistencies in alignment that suggested repeated access rather than permanent closure. "Someone has been inside this unit recently," he said. Carter glanced at the dog again. "And it knows it," he replied. The German Shepherd let out a low, controlled breath, then placed its paw against the panel once more, this time holding it there longer, as if confirming a response that only it could interpret. Emily stepped back slightly, her expression tightening. "There is something in there maintaining low-level activity," she said. "Not enough for standard operational use, but consistent enough to suggest a functioning system." Reeves turned toward her. "Functioning for what purpose?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied the readings again, then looked at Carter. "It is not storage in the traditional sense," she said. The implication hung between them without resolution. Carter felt a subtle shift in the German Shepherd's posture, a change in its breathing pattern, as though the animal had reached the point where patience was no longer required. It took one slow step back, then another, creating space between itself and the panel, but its eyes remained locked on the exact same point. In the distance, the sound of an approaching vehicle grew louder, likely command response arriving to secure the area, but none of them moved to acknowledge it. The moment felt suspended, as if whatever decision came next would define not only the container, but the reason the dog had arrived at the base at all. Emily lowered her voice. "If there is something inside that unit connected to this animal's condition, we need full clearance before proceeding further." Reeves nodded once. "That clearance is not going to arrive fast enough." Carter looked down at the German Shepherd, noticing how its body had begun to relax slightly despite exhaustion, as if it had completed the most difficult part of its task, and was now simply waiting for humans to catch up. The faint mechanical hum beneath the container became more noticeable again, steady and controlled, like a system operating on minimal power but still active. Carter placed his hand once more on the metal surface, feeling the vibration align with a slow, rhythmic pattern that did not feel accidental. The German Shepherd suddenly turned its head away from the panel and looked directly at Carter again, holding his gaze with an intensity that carried no confusion, only certainty. In that moment, Carter understood that the animal was no longer guiding them towards something unknown. It had already arrived at the place it needed to be, and whatever remained behind that sealed structure was not just a discovery waiting to be made, but a truth that had already begun to surface in silence. The arrival of the additional command vehicle did not break the tension around Storage Sector 7. It only layered it, as more personnel gathered at a respectful distance, observing without interrupting the quiet gravity already established between the German Shepherd and the sealed container. Sergeant Daniel Carter remained closest to the animal, his presence steady and grounded, as if instinctively understanding that any sudden shift in energy might disrupt something fragile but deliberate. Dr. Emily Watson stood slightly behind him now, continuing to monitor the faint signals detected within the structure, her expression increasingly focused as the readings stabilized into a consistent pattern that suggested controlled internal function rather than random fluctuation. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves stepped aside briefly to coordinate with arriving personnel, his voice low and precise as he relayed the situation without unnecessary detail, maintaining operational discipline even as uncertainty grew. The German Shepherd, however, showed no reaction to the increasing number of humans around it. Its attention remained fixed on the same point of the container, its posture now calmer but no less intentional, as though it had completed the most physically demanding part of its journey and now existed only to witness what followed. Carter noticed that the animal's breathing had steadied slightly, no longer erratic, but slow and deliberate, matching the quiet hum that continued beneath the metal surface. Emily adjusted her scanner again and spoke softly. "The internal system is responding to proximity changes," she said. "It is not passive. It is adaptive." Reeves returned his attention to the container immediately. "Adaptive to what?" he asked. Emily hesitated briefly before replying. "External presence." That single phrase shifted the atmosphere once again. Carter looked down at the German Shepherd, realizing that its presence might not only be related to what was inside the container, but possibly part of whatever mechanism or system it was now interacting with. The dog shifted slightly, stepping closer once more, and this time the faint hum beneath the container changed pitch almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging movement outside. Carter crouched beside it, studying the panel more carefully, noticing for the first time a subtle seam running horizontally across the lower section that did not align with standard structural design. Reeves noticed it as well. "That is not part of the original frame," he said quietly. Emily moved her scanner across the seam and paused when the data briefly spiked before returning to baseline. "There is a layered structure here," she said. "Something has been integrated into the container after initial deployment." The German Shepherd suddenly lowered its head toward the seam, pressing its nose close to the metal, remaining perfectly still for several seconds. Carter observed closely, noticing that the animal's posture had shifted from guiding to confirming, as if it had completed a sequence only it understood. In the distance, more personnel arrived, including a senior logistics officer who immediately began coordinating with Reeves, though their voices remained subdued, respecting the unusual nature of the situation. Carter, however, remained focused on the dog. Something in its expression had changed again, not urgency, but resolution. Emily stepped closer to Carter. "Whatever is inside," she said quietly, "it is not isolated. It is interacting with this animal in a measurable way." Carter looked at her. "You mean it is connected to it?" She nodded slowly. The implications of that statement settled heavily among them. The German Shepherd lifted its head once more and turned slightly toward Carter, holding his gaze longer this time, as if ensuring that understanding had reached the correct place. There was no fear in its expression, no hesitation, only a steady presence that suggested completion rather than anticipation. Reeves spoke again, his voice lower now. "Command will want full access to that unit within the hour." Carter did not respond immediately. His attention remained on the dog, which had now stepped back slightly from the panel, creating a small space between itself and the container, as if signaling that its role in guiding had concluded. The faint hum beneath the structure continued, steady and controlled, unchanged by the growing presence of personnel, but now more noticeable as silence deepened around it. Emily looked between Carter and the container. "We are not the first ones to be here," she said quietly. Carter slowly exhaled, absorbing the weight of the moment. The German Shepherd remained still, facing forward, no longer leading but waiting, as though whatever had brought it to the gate had finally reached the threshold of explanation, and the rest now belonged to those willing to uncover what had been carefully hidden behind layers of silence and steel. The atmosphere around Storage Sector 7 had shifted again, not in noise or motion, but in awareness, as if every person present understood they were standing at the edge of something that had already begun long before they arrived. The German Shepherd remained in place beside Sergeant Daniel Carter, no longer attempting to move toward the container, but instead holding a steady, watchful posture that suggested completion rather than urgency. Dr. Emily Watson reviewed her instruments once more, her expression tightening as the internal readings stabilized into a consistent low-frequency pattern that no longer fluctuated with external movement. Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves stood with command personnel now gathered behind him, speaking in controlled tones, but his attention repeatedly returned to the sealed container and the animal that had led them here. Carter remained closest to the dog, his presence calm but deeply focused, as if he was waiting for a moment that had already been set in motion. The faint hum beneath the container continued, unchanged, but now it felt less like background noise and more like a presence acknowledging observation. Emily stepped forward slightly and spoke with quiet certainty. "The system inside is not reacting randomly," she said. "It is maintaining a steady state, almost like it has been waiting for confirmation. Reeves turned toward her. Confirmation of what? She hesitated briefly, then looked at the German Shepherd. Presence, she said. The words settled heavily among them. Carter followed her gaze and noticed the dog had lowered itself slightly, not from weakness alone, but from stillness, as if it no longer needed to guide or push forward. Instead, it simply remained, eyes fixed forward, calm and unwavering. One of the senior logistics officers approached Reeves and spoke in a low voice, referencing authorization protocols and the need for immediate access verification. Reeves responded with brief acknowledgments, but did not initiate any action yet, as though waiting for something intangible to resolve before proceeding. Carter reached out slowly and placed his hand near the dog again, feeling the faint vibration in its frame, subtle but steady, matching the resonance from within the container. Emily moved closer to the panel seam once more, scanning carefully along its length. There is a synchronization pattern, she said quietly. External presence is aligning with internal frequency. Carter looked at her. You are saying it is responding to the dog. She shook her head slightly. Not responding. Matching. The German Shepherd lifted its head slightly at that moment, turning just enough to look at Carter again, its expression no longer searching or leading, but calm in a way that suggested understanding had already been achieved. Reeves took a step closer to the container, examining the access interface along the lower seam. If this is some kind of secured internal system, he said, then someone designed it to remain undetected unless specific conditions were met. Emily nodded slowly. And those conditions appear to be present now. A brief silence followed, filled only by distant bass activity and the steady mechanical hum beneath the structure. Carter felt a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, as if the moment they had been approaching was no longer approaching but already present. The German Shepherd slowly rose again, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty, then took a single step forward and stopped, directly aligned with the container seam. It did not press against it this time. It simply stood there, as if confirming that its task was complete. Carter realized then that the animal was no longer guiding them toward discovery. It was bearing witness to it. Emily stepped back slightly, lowering her scanner. We are at the threshold, she said softly. Reeves did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the container, then at Carter, then at the dog. Then we proceed carefully, he said at last. The German Shepherd remained still, eyes forward, as the entire group stood in silence before the sealed structure, the faint hum beneath it continuing without change, as though waiting for the final decision to be made by those who had finally arrived at the place it had been leading them all along. The silence that followed Staff Sergeant Michael Reeves's final statement was not empty, but concentrated, as if every person present understood that whatever came next would define the meaning of everything they had observed so far. The German Shepherd stood motionless beside Sergeant Daniel Carter, its posture calm and grounded, no longer guiding, no longer searching, only present. Dr. Emily Watson held her scanner steady, watching as the internal frequency readings beneath the container stabilized into a precise and unchanging pattern, as though something within had finally synchronized with the world outside. Carter did not move. His attention remained split between the dog and the sealed structure, sensing that the boundary between them had become less physical and more intentional. Reeves stepped forward slowly, signaling for controlled access to the auxiliary panel, while maintaining strict procedural caution. The logistics officer confirmed authorization protocols over radio, and a quiet acknowledgement returned through the channel. Emily took a half step back as the first technician approached the container, tools in hand, moving with careful precision toward the lower seam that had drawn their attention since the beginning. The German Shepherd did not react to the technician's presence. Instead, it shifted its gaze upward slightly, toward Carter, holding his eyes for a long moment, as if confirming that its role in this moment had already been fulfilled. Carter felt something settle within that gaze, not urgency, not fear, but completion. The technician paused at the panel and inserted a calibrated access interface into the seam. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then a faint mechanical alignment sound echoed through the structure, subtle but unmistakable, as if internal systems were acknowledging external validation for the first time. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice low. It is responding to physical authorization input, she said. Reeves watched closely, expression unreadable but focused. The panel released a soft internal click, and a narrow section of the container shifted inward by a fraction of an inch. No alarm sounded. No sudden changes occurred. Instead, there was only a steady continuation of the same controlled hum, now slightly more defined, like a system transitioning between states rather than activating for the first time. Carter felt the German Shepherd take a small step closer to him, not toward the container this time, but toward human presence, as if its task had shifted from guiding action to witnessing outcome. Emily studied the scanner again. Internal system is fully synchronized with external access protocol, she said quietly. Reeves nodded once. Then it is authorized to open. The technician applied a final sequence, and the panel released with a slow, controlled motion, revealing not chaos or disorder, but a sealed interior compartment lined with structured components and dormant systems, arranged with deliberate precision. There were no immediate alarms, no sudden exposure, only an engineered silence that suggested containment rather than concealment. Carter stepped slightly forward, eyes adjusting to the interior view. Emily followed, scanning carefully, her expression shifting from tension to focused recognition as she observed the configuration within. This was never standard storage, she said softly. Reeves did not respond immediately. The German Shepherd sat down slowly at Carter's side, its body finally relaxing completely for the first time since arriving at the base gate. Carter looked down at it and then back into the opened container, understanding in that moment that the journey had never been about arrival alone, but about recognition, connection, and the silent path that had led them here without words. The fog around Camp Pendleton had now fully lifted, revealing the base in clear morning light, but around Storage Sector 7, time itself seemed to pause, holding steady as if waiting for what would be understood next.